Hello and welcome back to this week's Labrats. So before we get into this week's experiment, I just wanted to do a recap of the last two experiments we've done. So we've learned about water transport in plants in last week's, and we've learned about photosynthesis and germination in the first week's lab. So I don't know when you guys planted your pea seeds, but mine has started to produce leaves. So now would be a good time, if your pea is producing leaves, to take it out of the cup and probably plant it with some soil. So you can purchase some soil somewhere and plant it. And over the course of the next little while, I'm going to be doing that myself and then documenting with you how the pea grows and how it goes through its general life cycle. And in the second experiment, I hope that you had good results with the food coloring and the celery. So you probably had an experience where you put your celery in the water and food coloring, and then the water traveled up the xylem, which transports water, and it traveled up and went to the leaves, and it turned your leaves blue if you use blue food coloring. So the point of that was that plants are able to transport water, which they need to survive, like all organisms do, from their roots to their leaves through xylem, and then they use that to produce photosynthesis, which they take sunlight and water and carbon dioxide, because they breathe carbon dioxide, we breathe oxygen, and they take those things and they create sugar out of it, and then they take that sugar and they store it in their roots, and that's why carrot roots taste sweet. So this week we're going to move on to a different group of organisms. We're still focusing on organisms, but we're changing it to something different. So this week we're actually studying fungus. Which the group of organisms that include fungus are actually right in between plants and animals. So they're like halfway between being a plant and halfway between being an animal. And if you decide to become a biologist, you'll study that and kind of come to understand why they're there. But for now, we'll just assume that they're there. And so in your kit, you will have received a water bottle, a balloon, and some yeast and some sugar. So yeast in this form you can actually find in the grocery store because we use it for baking. This is called baker's yeast. So every animal and plant and fungus and bacteria on the face of the planet we give a scientific name to, and so that all scientists around the world can talk about that animal or plant or whatever and know what that is, regardless of the language they speak. So this yeast, its scientific name is called Saccharomyces Cervasis. And saccaro means sugar, myces means fungus, and cervasis means basically to eat or to drink. So this is, what this guy's name means is literally sugar-loving fungus, sugar-eating fungus. So we use it in bread. Have you ever noticed that bread and buns and and other kinds of baking have little holes in them? Well, those little holes are actually created by the yeast, and that's why we put yeast in bread, is because it's what makes it rise. If you've ever watched somebody prepare bread dough, you'll notice that it actually starts to rise, and that's because of the yeast that's in it. So in order to do this experiment and understand the process that the yeast go through to actually produce the gases that make those little holes in the bread, we're going to conduct a little experiment. So inside of this bag, you will see that there are little kind of yellow granules, and there are little white granules. The white granules is sugar, and that's what the yeast eats. And those little yellow granules are the actual yeast themselves. Inside one of these tiny granules is about 200,000 microscopic little yeast guys. So there's 200,000 little yeasts in every one of these tiny, tiny, tiny little balls, which is pretty crazy. So what the yeast does is it really likes sugar. So it eats the sugar, and as it eats the sugar, it actually produces carbon dioxide. So it takes in sugar and it expels carbon dioxide. So we're gonna actually watch this process take place. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to take the cap off your little clear bottle here, and you are going to fill it with 1 cup of lukewarm water. So you want to, when you're preparing your water, you don't want it to be too hot, because if it's too hot for you, it's too hot for your yeast, and it'll actually kill it because it's alive. So it'll scald it to death, basically. So you don't want it to be too hot, but you want it to be lukewarm. So like a temperature that you're comfortable with putting your hand in. So you're going to pour your water into the jug, and then you're going to take your little satchel of sugar and yeast, and with using scissors, if you don't have a funnel, you can use a funnel if you have one at home, but if you don't, you can make a makeshift funnel by taking a pair of scissors and just cutting a small hole, if I can do that, into your bag, just like that. So it creates a little opening, and then you're going to pour your yeast and your sugar into the bottle just like this, and it's going to take a little bit of time. So so the yeast is basically in a dormant state. So it's kind of like it's sleeping. It's not awake. So when you add it to the water and you add the sugar to it, it wakes it up and it begins to digest. It begins to eat the sugar just like we would eat anything else. And in the process of doing that, it creates gas. So as soon as you have all that in there, take this and put the cap back on and give it a little bit of a shake until everything's dissolved. And it kind of turns this gross, milky, yellowy color. And then you're going to take the cap off, and you're going to take your balloon, and before doing all this, you should blow up your balloon a few times just so that it's like been stretched out so that it's more easy to fill with air. And you're going to take that and you're going to put the balloon right over top and then leave it for a little while. But you'll notice that already, actually, that there's a bunch of little air bubbles in there, and that's because the yeast is already waking up and eating that sugar and creating gas, because this is alive, just like a plant, just like an animal, just like us. It's very alive. And I already prepared one for you. And so this I did about half an hour ago, and you can see, first of all, that there's all those gas bubbles and that it's actually blown that balloon up quite a bit. So this is a process basically of the yeast waking up from the water, having sugar available to it so it can eat, and as a byproduct of eating that, it actually produces carbon dioxide. So, and this is really cool. We obviously use it for bread. This is why this is why bread has all those little holes in it, is because it's produced from the yeast. So you're thinking, okay, that's great, it makes bread, but what does it do in the actual world around us? So back when the first organisms on Earth were like tiny little microscopic guys like this. And what they do is, like a yeast, it takes sugar and oxygen and produces carbon dioxide. But we've learned that other things like plants and other small microorganisms, some of them also photosynthesize. And so the fact that we have oxygen in the atmosphere for us to breathe is because some of these things produce oxygen, just like plants, right? We all hear that trees are responsible for the air we breathe. Well, that's true. Trees produce about 20% of the oxygen we breathe, but actually it's little microscopic guys like this that actually end up producing about 80% of the oxygen that we breathe in the world. So when you are out on the lake next time and you take a cup of water and scoop it out and look at it, you'll see that there's lots of green things in it. Those little tiny microscopic green things are what produce 80% of the oxygen in our world. So pretty cool, right? So with your kit this week, I've also included a recipe for bread. So if you decide that you're really into this and you want to make some bread, you can do that. And otherwise, I'll be posting this video and you can let me know how your experiment turns out. So thank you.